Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back James Ivory. Let me just say it's an honor to be here with you. I've seen this movie many times, but never with you in the room, so that's very exciting. This really is a special film, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels very strongly about these characters, and I feel like I've read the book a couple times, I've seen the film many times, and I feel like I've lived with these characters for many years, so thank you very much for making this film. Well, first I'd like to ask about the adaptation and E.M. Forster. You've along with your partner Ismail Merchant and Ruth Prowar-Jabvala, the screenwriter, have adapted many works of literature, Kazuo Ishiguro, Henry James, but you've done a lot of E.M. Forster with Room with a View, also in Morris and this.
Right.
So what appeals to you about E.M. Forster the most?
About E.M. Forster generally, or about
E.M. Forster and Howard Zinn specifically?
Well, I think basically it's just his insight on life and his humor, which is always there. His very sharp observation of what makes people tick, and particularly in England, the various classes tick. That was all appealing, and I don't know. I really wasn't. I didn't set out to really sort of specialize in E.M. Forster. I got interested in him because I read Passage to India, but I had a whole sort of life in India, and naturally I would have read the Passage to India sooner or later, and it was sort of almost required reading, and that's how I really got into. Came to appreciate E.M. Forster, but we were busy making other films, American ones and other Indian films, and eventually, what I wanted to do was to go back to Italy, where I started out with my very first film, was a film made in Venice, and I just wanted to go back to Italy again, just be there. I'd been away from Italy for 20 years, and I wanted to go back and do something there. And then I just, almost by chance, read A Room with a View. And I thought, wow, okay, now I can go back to Italy. And really, it was no more a serious thing than that. I mean, it was a very charming, interesting story. The whole idea of shooting the film in Florence was, though I didn't know Florence yet, I came to know Florence through that film. So that's how we got into E.M. Forster. Was just whims, you could say. And actually, Forster never allowed. He never wanted his novels to be made into films. He always refused. A lot of people wanted to very early on wanted to make his films, his books into films, and he always said no. And Satyajit Ray even wanted to make a Passage to India at one point, and he came to see Forster. And even though Forster was very impressed by the Apu trilogy, or as much as he showed him, he still said no. And then Forster died, and some time passed, and we were doing this and that and the other, and we ourselves made a film set in 1920s India, which was Heat and Dust, which was a real big success, and we enjoyed doing it. And then we got a call from King's College in Cambridge, which was they were the trustees of Forster's books and estate and all that, and they said, could we come up to lunch? And so Ismail and I went up to lunch, and we kind of knew that probably they were going to say, wouldn't you like to make Passage to India? And that's indeed what they did say. And we said, no, what we'd like to make is A Room with a View. And they said, what? To them, it was a little inconsequential comedy, something of that sort. But we didn't want to make another 20s film set in the British Raj. We just made one. It was still playing in London. So he said, no, we wanted to make a room with a view. And I couldn't really say, well, the real reason I want to make room with a view is to go and be in Italy again. I couldn't really say that to them. But that was my reason. And
that's a good reason to make a movie.
So that's all led to eventually. Then we made Morris in time. And it was Ruth who was, of course, Passage to India was then made by David Lean. He got the rights to it. And so in time, Ruth thought, so it was her idea. She said, well, really the Forster book that really needs to be made is Howard's End. So we did it. And
well, there's an amazing sense. Again, I've read the book a couple times, including just recently, of everything almost seeming like it was directly out of the book. There's such an amazing loyalty, but also the way that he describes things, it really is up there on the screen, and certainly with the casting. So there's an amazing cast here, but Emma Thompson, who of course won the Oscar for this film, this was really her breakthrough role. She'd been doing comedy before this. How did you discover her?
It was Simon Callow who told me about her. I'd never heard of her. I didn't know about her, and I hadn't seen that. I'd never seen her perform in anything in London, and I didn't know that she'd made that film with that first film that she made with Kenneth Branagh. I don't think she'd made that yet. But he told me about her, and then she came to read, and she didn't read from the script. She just she hadn't even seen the script. I gave her the novel, and she read a bit. A couple of scenes from the novel, and I thought, well, this is it.
She has an amazing quality, and she really seems like Margaret Schlegel.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, also.
And can you talk about working with Vanessa Redgrave as well? She's particularly luminous in this film, and it's almost like she's playing a ghost before she's actually a ghost.
Well, that's true. Well, from day one, I wanted Vanessa. There was never any idea that I just didn't think of anybody else. And we kept telling her, and I think we sent the script to her several times, and we never heard from her. And it was getting closer and closer to the time we were going to do it. We still didn't know. And then we heard vaguely that she said, "Well, yes, I will do it." But she was a bit. She was thinking of so many other things in her political life and all the other films she was making and so forth. And she didn't really get it quite straight, which Mrs. Wilcox she was going to play. And so it's true. And when she arrived on the set the first day to be made her hair and makeup, she knew she was playing Mrs. Wilcox. And then it took a bit of diplomatic revelation from the hairdresser that, in fact, it was the elder Mrs. Wilcox she was going to play. Oh, well, that was fine. And so she did. This is a true story.
That's incredible.
That's the way it was.
Well, it's an inside-out performance. It seems like she lived with the character for many months before she started. She's remarkable.
Well, anything she does has got this. There is this, as you say, luminous. I don't know how many of you ever saw The White Countess, but the role she played in The White Countess is just extraordinary, I think.
She's amazing in everything. Also, the house itself obviously is a major character, but the way that it looks on screen also seems very similar to how it's described on the page. I wonder, I know it's a location scouting question, but where did you find this amazing house?
Well, the production designer, Luciana Righi, she knew the people who owned the house. And she approached them. Actually, the owner of the house was a dealer in antique silver, and it was his family house. And all his kids had grown up, and they didn't need such a big house anymore. It was good for a film. I mean, we took over the whole house, and that's how.
Were in the interiors also what you see on screen? So
we were pretty much like that. I mean, we had to refurnish them. You always have to. You always have to do a lot to, you usually have to refurnish a place when you get it.
I'm interested in that this film, this beautiful new restoration, when it's released, it's going to be playing at the Paris Theater, which is close to here.
Right.
And I was recently reading that A Room with a View, when it opened in New York, played for a straight year at the Paris Theater. So it's like a homecoming.
It played for a straight year in that theater, exactly.
Is that? Can you talk a little bit about? This is going back to Room with a View a little bit as well, because it really started this Forster cycle. But the immense success of that really seemed to pave the way.
As with this film, we weren't expecting necessarily success, though I did feel, after I saw the first completed, not the rough cut, but the final sort of cut, when we kind of whittled it down a bit, I thought, well, maybe people will like this. Maybe, because people don't always enjoy your films. Sometimes they don't like them at all. So I thought, perhaps people will like it. But when at the process with this film, we had to. I mean, it was an enormously long film. It was well over 3 hours. So we had to get rid of like an hour, and finally, on the last day of cutting, we had gotten rid of the hour, and it was down to 2 hours and 20 minutes. And we figured, well, this is just the way it's got to be. And we left the editing room. I edited up in the country in Columbia County. That's where our editing room was, in our house. And Ruth and I left. It was quite late, and walked up. It was summer. And she said, well, it is what it is. That was her opinion.
Was there anything that you lost, that you cut from the film, that you regret?
No.
Or that you missed?
I can never remember those things. I've often been asked that, whether there are scenes you'd put back in. One or two little things in Morris I would have put back in. But, no.
That's good. No
Never
regrets.
know.
Just out of curiosity, just because we're talking about it, having reread it recently, there's a scene in the book that I'm fascinated by, which happens on the road where they accidentally hit a cat. Is that a scene that was
cat or dog?
They think that it's a dog. It turns out to be a cat.
Right. Well,
and Margaret Schlegel is very upset about this, and it almost disrupts this whole party.
That's an important was an important thing to me. I read Howard's End, and didn't remember much about it, but I remembered that scene. Then I read it a second time, and I still didn't remember much about it, or get the story straight, but I remembered that scene. Now, the scene is Charles Wilcox is driving Margaret, going very fast, and they go through a little village, and they hit a cat, though she was afraid it was a dog. Anyways, he wouldn't stop the car, and she stands up and jumps out of the car. And to me, that's the one thing I could remember about Howard's End, and I thought this would be the most terrific scene to direct, but we couldn't do it. I mean, finally, you can't. Nowadays, you could show a car running over a cat or a dog. There would be ways of doing that, but there was, in those days, there wasn't a way, and so that essential detail, horrible as it is, it wasn't there, and we shot the scene, but we never could get it it didn't make sense. It's just we didn't know what had happened. I hadn't thought it through.
What you're saying made me think of something that I was thinking watching the film, which is that all this beautiful production design, which also won an Academy Award, it's all really there. You watch a lot of period films these days, and a lot of it is computer-generated imagery. They don't really have to do that much larger scale set design, but when you see these amazing city scenes, you're seeing some very elaborate production design. Can you talk a little bit about the approach to that? And I think there are just so many memorable scenes, like even the interior of the department store at Christmas. It really feels like you're going back in time.
It actually is Fortnum and Mason's, and the art directors just do a hell of a lot of work in order to do all that. And as I say, you have to refurnish everything usually, and bring a ton of stuff. And it was hard in those days, before all the computer generated things that you can do now. It was hard to. It was not a large budget to do city street scenes with a lot of cars and horse-drawn things and trucks and whatnot. As you notice, there's only two There are only two scenes like that. There's when they go through Admiralty Arch, and there's another one at the Bank of England. And the rest is pretty much all interiors, or you're in the country where you don't have that problem.
Right. But that's the magic of cinema, right? You feel like you're just completely transported.
I tell you, one of the biggest things that we never knew, I mean, it was something that haunted us from the beginning, and that was, when would we mow that field? We knew it had to be mowed, but we weren't sure we would be able to shoot that scene and have the mowing of the field. We thought we'd have to cut the grass and we wouldn't be able to mow. That was hanging over us like a sort of curse all through the shoot. And then eventually we were able to work it out. So.
I also just wanted to ask quickly about Anthony Hopkins, because this is directly after this you went right into The Remains of the Day, and I think another incredible film. And these performances by Anthony Hopkins are pretty extraordinary. I just was wondering, and they're so restrained and subtle. He conveys so much without showing much. I'm just wondering what working with him is like. Is there? How do you get to that point of subtlety?
Well, you know, a lot of it is, it's not coming from the director. It really is coming from the actors, and they are so they go into the character so deeply that they thought it out so well, I think. And it's not me saying do this, do that, don't do this, or I mean, it's really what the actor feels and brings to it. And I've always felt, I mean, I've said this before and I've written it, but I feel that actors are very, very deep, in fact, in thinking about their role. I mean, they go into it and they're bringing to it all their life experience and the experience of other people they've known, and they bring to it so much in terms of emotion and psychological sort of penetration and reason and so forth. They've thought about it so very, very deeply, but it's a narrow thing in a way. It goes like that. Whereas a director is wide but shallow, because you have to think so many things. I mean, you cannot go deeply into all the things that you really would like to go into or you need to go into, because you have to think of everything. And I think that's the way it is. And all the actors are really, I mean, very, very good actors. They're bringing so much truly out of their souls, and that's what they give you. And I think it's crazy to not let them do that. I mean, they have to show you what it is they want to do, what they've developed, what they've thought out, what it means, what they think of the character. You have to let them show you that. Now, sometimes they show you something wrong, or they're not. You don't quite like something that they're doing, and then you have to guide them away from that. But on the whole, you have to allow them to demonstrate what it is. And in fact, that's not just the actors. I think that's true of all the artists that you hire for a film, whether it's the costume designers, or the hairdressers, whoever it is. You have to let them show you what it is they want to do. You may have difficulties accepting some of it, but they're all artists. I mean, you have to respect that.
Did they all read the book in preparation? Because it
sure.
really seems like they're...
No, they all read the book. There are sometimes there are films where the actors wander around with the book and they bring it out and they come up to you and a particular scene they like, one of their scenes, and they say, well, you know, that's not in the script. Couldn't we do this? And so on. There's a lot of that happens. I remember when we made The Europeans, all the actors are wandering around with the paperback copy of The Europeans, and all of them are coming up and sort of pulling on me and saying, well, why not this? This is so good. I love these lines. Why aren't they there? So,
watching it again after all these years, what goes through your mind with these performances in the film? Does it kind of take you back to the moment, or do you think,
sometimes,
could have used a different cut or anything?
Sometimes, yeah, it does. Yeah, I remember certain things. But on the whole, I really don't so much recall with individual scenes what it was like to shoot them. I mean, there are occasions when you do, but I mean, I don't remember them anymore.
I'd love to open it up to the audience if anyone has a question. Yes.
Yes, I'm very curious about the scene.
There's a mic right behind you.
I'm very curious about the scene in which Margaret basically
tells Charles that she forgives him for his involvement with Jackie. And that scene
Henry.
is punctuated with fade-outs, fades to black. And it's a very unusual sort of approach because there's nothing else like it in the film. And I'm
Yes,
just
there is.
wondering, what was your thought there?
No, it's Simpsons in the Strand. We did the same thing. When they go to the restaurant.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
same thing happens there.
Well, it really struck me with the particular scene I just mentioned.
But both scenes were very, very, very long, and particularly the one where Margaret goes and forgives him. I mean, it just went on and on and on. You could not have, it was 10 minutes long or something. You couldn't have a scene like that, really. It was just, everyone would have gotten bored. So we had to chop it about because we had that room and he was wandering around in it and she was wandering around in it, and we had to make quite dramatic jumps forward and take into account where everybody was sitting and standing and so forth. I mean, that's always, the camera movements, and so we just had to chop it up and do like that, and that's what we did. And the same, it wasn't quite like that as Simpsons because that too was a very long scene, but at least they were all sitting around the table. They weren't moving around, but that too got, it was too long, and I just thought, well, let's do that.
It's a brilliant use of editing because I agree. It seems like it was conceived that way. They're so clever.
It wasn't. It was conceived in the normal classical way. You just shoot this whole long thing, and then you edit it, and then you have something that's like 10 minutes long, and you don't want that.
It was a witty.
So what can you do? And particularly when there's so many camera movements in it, and the actors are moving all over the place.
I love when it cuts in the restaurant scene and it's moved on to the cheese course. You really feel like you're moving through the meal. That's
Right.
why
Well,
it
yeah.
really feels
Yeah.
like it was intentional. Another question? Well, you have two, right?
I had a question about the music. Your films are always just really beautifully scored. How much does that play into the way you put the film together? Are you thinking about music ahead of time, or it's after?
Well,
it's
you do
done?
think about of it ahead of time if you have source music. I mean, if a performer, for instance, is singing or playing or something, or there's dance music or whatever, that kind of thing. You're in a nightclub. That all has to be thought out in advance. I mean, you have to work with that, and so that's very much planned. But the actual score is that comes about after the film is edited, pretty much.
But is it something that you suggest the sound you would like?
Well, sometimes it depends. Somewhat, it depends on who your composer is. Now, my composer on most of my films for years was Richard Robbins, and who I saw constantly, and we would talk about stuff, but again, you have to let them demonstrate what it is they want to do, or what they're thinking about it all the time, and bringing their own ideas to it, and you have to learn what those ideas are. Sometimes you say, I don't want that, and you throw music away, and but on the whole, it's an ongoing process.
But it's amazing how the subtlest musical cue really does it changes the film in so many ways. I mean, even the very opening, you have this very dramatic swell of music, and then it goes back down to the bridal suite.
That swell of music puts off projectionists, or did in the past. They thought the music was too loud, and so there was this tremendous thing. And that was one of the things I complained about to Dick Roberts. I thought, this is going to just upset a lot of projectionists, and it did. And so they would turn down the sound, and if they turned down the sound, then all the sound and all the music was turned down.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I would have to go and warn the projectionists. I said, there's going to be this blast at the beginning, and you just have to live with it. And that happened.
I love that choice. I think it's very dramatic, and it sets the mood for something substantial.
Well, yeah, and of course, he was right. But
right here.
We made a bookcase. Of course, we had to make our own bookcase, and then it was attached to the wall in such a way that when it fell, it was not really falling and crushing him. There were sort of things attached to it, so it didn't fall with all its weight. So it spilled out the books.
That was it.
But it didn't really fall on him with all its weight, because it was a crew of people keeping it from doing that, and it was, I can't remember exactly, but there were sort of bands and.
But what was reaching me was the fact that all of these books were flying out.
You know, and I can't remember anymore whether that was our idea or whether that's in Forster. It may be in the novel.
I hope so.
About the bookcase. I really don't know. I don't want to claim credit for it. It might have been Forster.
I think you were probably very faithful to him.
Well, we tried to be.
You had a wonderful writer.
Yes.
Ruth was a wonderful.
Yes.
Over here.
Jumping right off that, I wondered about your workflow with her, especially since she really wanted to make this in particular, and just in general, your workflow. You have such a special relationship with the three of you working together. So consistent.
Well, we worked it depends on how or what we were doing. I mean, sometimes we worked. We would co-write a screenplay. And if it was, that was not the case here. If it was a co-written thing, then I would write my version first and give it to her. And she would then take that and work from it. Though she would have all kinds of ideas of her own, and there would still be things in the novel, say, or whatever the original work was that she wanted to maybe put in that I had not put in, things of that kind. But if it was... And we never showed things to each other if it wasn't finished. I never just showed her individual scenes and say, well, okay, here's the first part. It wasn't like that. I would do a complete script and give it to her. If she alone was writing the script, as at Howard's End, she would write the whole thing. And when she liked it, when she was satisfied with it, then she would give it to us. And then it would go through further revisions, though, because there would be things that I didn't like. Sometimes Ismail would point out that there were certain things we needed, that he missed certain things, moments that he thought ought to be there, and they weren't there. So that would be like the second stage of it. Then we'd have a finished screenplay, and with the finished screenplay, we would. That's when you try to raise the money and find the actors, and then say that you're successful at that, and then it goes through a third. Because then you find locations and things that are written in the script cannot be, in fact, created. You have to change the script and so forth. That happens all the time. So it's a process. And for the first films that we were making, when she was still living in India, there were hundreds and hundreds of letters going back and forth over, well, a couple of decades, talking about the script. I mean, she was writing away, and I would send her my ideas, or she'd send me her ideas, or she'd rebut what I was asking for or putting to her, and or the other way around. But it was she was in India, I was in New York, and we worked like that. But then in the mid-70s, she moved to New York, and we all lived together in the same building. So then it was a matter just of it was easy to we didn't have to. That's when the letters stopped. So,
anyone else? Oh, way up. Yeah.
Is there for you, I could speculate, but I'd like to ask, is there for you an interesting problem about the relationship between music and meaning, whatever those terms mean? The phrase that's mentioned, I think, 2 or 3 times, principally by this earnest-driven, angry young man. Yeah, I mean, in some, I don't know what sense.
But what is the question?
The phrase music and meaning.
Well, no, I don't know whether that's in Forster or whether that's something that came from Ruth. I really don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I suspect it is Forster.
It is, but a fascinating thing that I love, having just reread the book, about that. It's the 5th chapter of the book, and what Simon Callow says in the film that Ruth has turned into a lecture actually is written on the page by E.M. Forster. It's almost a philosophical chapter that asks questions about music and meaning and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony specifically.
Right.
So
That's
very
described
cleverly, the movie turns it into a lecture.
In the novel, I remember that. A long, very interesting thing about goblins and elephants and all sorts of things. It's very interesting to read. But then at one point, who is it? Is it Margaret who says, "Well, does music have meaning?" Doesn't she say that?
After the lecture,
or is it Helen who asks
and
that?
Tibby says that that's poppycock or something.
Yeah. So in the novel itself, they are actually listening to it's the Fifth Symphony that. It's a huge symphony orchestra at Albert Hall in London. Well, that was just we could not possibly do that. We couldn't fill up Albert Hall with thousands of extras, and we couldn't hire with our budget an entire symphony orchestra, and so we had to turn it into a lecture on the symphony.
It's very clever. Any other questions? Yes, right here.
You said earlier that you shot an outdoor scene at Admiralty Arch, and you just said that you couldn't shoot in the Albert Hall. It seems these days it would have to be the other way around.
Well, Admiralty Arch wasn't all that easy to work out because it's right there is the headquarters of what is it? It's like our CIA. It's right there. Whatever it is. That was their headquarters. You couldn't even, there was no way you could reach them. You couldn't call them to make arrangements. Would it be possible to shoot there? And as I remember, the only way to reach them was by fax, which they might or might not, answer. But yeah, they did ultimately let us do it. We were allowed to be there from 5 in the morning till 9 in the morning, exactly, then out. And we did all that in just that time, on one day, on one Sunday.
Probably have time for just one more, unless we've asked all the questions. I guess one last question from me then. Kind of jumping off this, so many of your films were made in England and often in London.
Well, not that many, in fact.
Really?
I mean, yeah. But there are more French films than English ones.
Oh.
People don't know that.
I didn't know that.
No, it's true.
But
we made the 3 Forster films, and then we made Remains the Day and The Golden Bowl. Those are the ones. I mean, of the features.
And Morris.
Well, three Forster
Three
films.
Forsters,
Three
right.
Forster films, and Remains the Day, and then finally The Golden Bowl.
I guess because they're the most beloved and famous, it just seems that way. But there are so many films that you have made and so many wonderful films to discover. And I highly recommend The Bostonians with Vanessa Redgrave. It's really a magnificent adaptation.
Yeah, I'd like to see that again. It's been years since I've seen it, and I'd like to see it here.
Somebody bring that here.
Yeah, but there are ways from restoring that, but they will.
Well, I hope so, and I hope that you come back when they show it. Thank you very much for coming.